Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's start a whole new series here based on some of your suggestions. This one I'm going to pick is from a newer suggestion, and then I'll start looking at some of the older suggestions as well. So please keep on posting those suggestions. I'll continue to take a look at them throughout the week, and then also I'll probably make about just a few more videos this go around. This one I picked because not only is it a new suggestion, but it has a distinctive, unfortunate note to it when it comes to social media. In fact, it's been considered as the first crime mystery of the social media age, considering when this unfortunate circumstance occurred. So, more information on that here in a minute. But it has to do with the disappearance of a woman who some argue disappeared on her own. In other words, she went missing on purpose, and then others argue that it's more of something like nefarious, like something happened, someone caused her to disappear, or something else altogether different. But it has to do with this. It's known as the disappearance of Maura Murray. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information associated with this mysterious disappearance. So who was Maura Murray? Well, she was a young woman who was born there in Hanson, Massachusetts. She lived a life basically as any other normal young teen, any young girl. So she grew up with a family. The family went through a divorce. Afterwards, she went to a high school called the Whitman Hanson Regional High School, and she was on track to be like a star student, either both on the athlete and on the academic side. So eventually she joined a United States Military Academy when she was going off after high school, and then finally transferred over to University of Massachusetts, Amherst, there. That way she could study nursing. So everything seemed normal up to a certain point, obviously before the disappearance. So the only blip that you could call within her history happened to be about 3 months before her disappearance. Apparently, she found a stolen credit card and decided to use it to order food from several restaurants. So it seems like though this initial crime was later discharged or dismissed, as long as it's 3 months of good behavior. But the timing of it is just the only blip associated with her life. But cut to, in this case, February, and it had to do with these fateful days. So what happened, and I'll explain some brief history of for it, and then afterward more history. But it happened around February 7th to February 9th, to be specific, and the year exactly was 2004. Again, this ties in more on the social media age here in a minute. But yes, back in that February 7th period, she was working at a place there right on campus, doing some kind of security job. Apparently, she was working long hours or some kind of hours there late at night, so that way she could pay for some of their costs of her school. But there was one notable instance there that night, actually it was February 5th, my apologies, where it seemed like all of a sudden one of her supervisors realized that she was just completely zoned out. Like it was almost like she was in tears and she was completely unresponsive. And so that night she was put back into her dorm very late at night, around 1:20 a.m. So that was one notable distinction, and it all happened to do with a call that apparently that she received that night. So cut to a couple days later, in this case February 7th, and she joined her father, and they went car shopping sometime that afternoon, and then went to have dinner as well. And then afterward, whenever she dropped off her father at the motel room, because the way the story went, it seemed like he was visiting from another location, then she borrowed his Toyota Corolla and then went to a dorm party. Shortly after that dorm party, however, cutting into February 8th, because now it's the next morning, she was back en route to her father's motel when she accidentally hit a guardrail. And when that happened, she caused nearly $10,000 damage to the car. There was a police report, like an accident report, that was done there as well. No mention of any sobriety field tests, which is kind of interesting because I'll highlight more of that too here in a second. But otherwise, it was the car was brought back. Her father was notified. They stayed together, I guess, for a little while. There were some more phone calls placed, in this case from her to her boyfriend, using her father's phone, if I'm not mistaken. And then that's when he left afterward, because he was getting back to another location. He was getting back to his original location. So cut to, in this case, February 9th. Now later on that day, And that's when things, of course, took the fateful turn. Apparently, during that time period, later investigation into this matter brought up this. She was using her computer to start searching directions to places called the Berkshires and also in Burlington, Vermont. She was using it extensively, it seemed like. And then also, she was using email and voicemail to tell people, she'll call them later on today, she'll get back to them, stuff like that. Not necessarily telling them exactly what she's going to do, but at the same time, not kind of like paving a way for something happening in the future. And then she made other calls in this case too, someplace like by renting a condo there in New Hampshire, but that place, that person that she called, she ended up not renting it there, but still the inquiry was there too. And then finally that day as well, she emailed one of her supervisors letting her know that there was a death in her family. Turns out there wasn't, but she told the supervisor that she needed a week off from her job because of that death in her family. So all of this was being done, it seems like, as a way to cover up things or to plan on something that would happen soon. But yes, more records then showcase later on her calling other hotels, in this case in near Vermont, Stowe, Vermont, and then finally calling her boyfriend, leaving a message again that they would talk later, and then that was it. So, and then the way the story goes is eventually police found, it seems like, evidence of her packing things, everything into one of her backpacks and then leaving her location, wherever she was staying at there. I think it was at the college. In fact, later on, police would search that room and they would find things placed as if she was going to leave, like as if something was happening ahead of time, and so she was packing things all together. But yes, all of this stuff was just investigated and it was found after she disappeared. But then during that same time period, again, before the disappearance occurred, she went to an ATM, withdrew $280. Again, footage shows there from the ATM as well. Of all this happening, it shows her, in other words, on the camera. And then also there's other footage that shows her on that day, in this case going to a liquor store, purchasing about $40 worth of liquor, and this liquor was later found in her car after she disappeared. But again, this security footage noted one thing, same thing with the ATM, she was by herself. There was nobody there with her, nothing pointing, in other words, to somebody like almost forcing her to do things against her will, or somebody in the background constantly monitoring her. Nothing like that, no. In fact, she even stopped by the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles during that same time period to pick up some forms in relation to that crash I was mentioning earlier, the one that caused $10,000. So all of this was happening within the same day with regards to all this preparedness, I guess, whatever the plan was afterward. But finally, towards later that day, around 7 p.m. or so, some neighbors around an area near Woodsville, New Hampshire, noted a large thump outside of their house. And when they looked at it, they could see that there was a car lined up against a snowbank on a road that's called the Wild Amanusuk Road. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but it seemed like this car had crashed because of the snow into that embankment against some kind of, I don't know, tree or something else there, and there it was stationed. So after that, around 7:27, there was a call made in by somebody there to report the incident. This woman, whoever this neighbor was, saw somebody within the car, and it looks like there was a red light inside the car indicating use of a cell phone, like somebody had their cell phone on in the darkness of the car, but then that was it. Finally, there was a school bus driver. This was probably the most important witness throughout all this, because they were the last persons to see her essentially alive, if she is still alive. So this school bus driver pulled up and noticed that there was a young woman in this car all by herself, cold and shivering. So he offered to call for help, and this was because, this is notable, apparently on that road there's no cell phone reception. But he later testified, or noted, that yes, this was Maura Murray that was within the car. But Maura stated no, no need to call the police. In fact, she already called AAA. Again, he somehow noted that because he knew that this was a road that doesn't really have good reception or any reception at all. And so it was almost like she was pleading him to not do so. And so the bus driver just continued home, but he still called the police. This was about 7:30 whenever this occurred. He got home to his location around 7:43. The minute he did so, he called the police, and then he was able to have somebody come over. It only took about 9 minutes from that time period for the police to come over, but during that time period, somewhere between then is, in this case, what happened. There was something that occurred. Either she ran off and she basically disappeared on her own, or somebody took her, abducted her, picked her up, whatever was the case. But within those 9 or 10 minutes, something happened, and when the police later came by, because of the call from the bus driver, they did not find Maura there. They did not see anything as far as any indication that she was no longer there. No footprints, nothing at all. In fact, all they saw was just a car with the wine that I was mentioning earlier. In fact, there was a bottle that was opened. It was like a beer bottle or some kind of liquor that was open, and then some of the contents of the wine that she bought was also seemingly broken, because there was red wine that was on the floor. But yes, that was in that just a short time period. That's what the police found whenever they pulled up, but no indication of Maura anywhere around. Afterward, that's when the police got involved, clearly, because they were now dealing with somebody that they would consider missing. They brought forth dogs, in other words, to try to find her by scent, and they were able to pick up her scent only till about 100 feet or so. It was at that point that the scent was lost, so they surmised that she must have gone into someone else's car, or somebody must have picked her up, or worse yet, somebody took her from that location, because afterward it just dropped off, and then that was it. Like, there was no under indication of her. There were multiple searches afterward, year after year. In fact, I was reading, I think there were like 4 or 6 more searches to try to find her. Huge searches too, involving like at least 100 people. In some cases, the FBI was brought in as well. Various departments of police were also brought into. Of course, the father, he was someone that was very much into this too, trying to find out exactly what happened. The only whereabouts of anything, any indication of any kind, was apparently there was a voicemail that was left with regards to the boyfriend, and it was a sobbing woman, and it was surmised or believed that this was her sobbing. It was left shortly after her disappearance, but that was it. There was nothing like in terms of somebody talking. No, it was just somebody sobbing into the phone, and the call was traced to a calling card issued by the American Red Cross, but no indication at least of where it was pinpointed to. And then the father, he was still heavily involved trying to find everything happening with this disappearance. He surmised in various interviews that somebody abducted her. Like, this was something that it was bad circumstance, bad place, wrong time. In other words, wrong place, wrong time. The police were going more on the lines that it might have been that she was upset or suicidal, and then that's why she disappeared by herself or on her own. And others that believe that, and more others that believed on the father's side. It all depends really on who you talk to this very day. More searches continued. There was tracking dogs, cadaver dogs, helicopters as well. This was noted, as I mentioned earlier, as the first instance of some kind of social media, like the first crime mystery of social media age, because when she disappeared on that date in February, that was 5 days after Facebook first started. At that time, it was just barely, clearly in its infancy. But even then, once the 1 year anniversary started, and then it continued, forward every year anniversary, there were Facebook pages, MySpace pages as well, dedicated to helping find her. All of this was happening during the early infancy of the social media age. So she was one of the very first people, in this case, that were prominently featured as missing. The father continued to try to find any instance of her, doing lots of interviews. I found lots of articles related to it too, all of it based on upcoming anniversaries as well. He appeared on shows, CNN as well. There was Montel Williams too that he appeared on to try to showcase anything that might come up, but nothing else has occurred. There are several theories of what happened. There there was the very, very brief idea that something was happening with her boyfriend, because apparently they were having huge fights, and then the last known calls concerned him, including that mysterious sobbing call, but it was quickly dismissed, I guess, considering like where he was, and then when he was interviewed by the police, he was just cleared afterward. But there's others as well. There's the idea that she might have been missing on purpose, because she fled. She went over to some place, including people stating that they have seen her in Canada. So somehow, some way, she crossed the border and then went across there to Canada and has been living there ever since. There might have been the idea that she'd also disappeared because apparently she was in some kind of large student debt. I tried to find more information on that, but I couldn't. But if someone has more info, please post those below. But yes, there's that notion too, that she didn't, there was a lot of things that were happening in her life with her boyfriend, with her student debt, other things in her life too, with her sister as well, and that's why she decided to leave on her own. I remember reading there was a large percentage of missing cases, like well over half of missing cases are people wanting to be missing on purpose, something along those lines. So that's why the police seem to go sometimes with that route. But yes, with regards to that, there's those theories, and then there's the other ones that something nefarious happened. People grabbed her, somebody took her, she just happened to hop in a car, whatever the first one, I guess, that took her somewhere, and it was a bad place, bad time. There was a notion that there was somebody that presented a knife, apparently, that was used to kill her, but it turns out that it wasn't, I guess, 100% definitive, because this knife, the way the story was, it was mainly to collect a reward, not really to try to solve the thing, because there was some rewards if someone could figure out what happened to her. But there was that as well. The idea also that there was some kind of, I guess, closet or something involving a home where cadaver dogs were going crazy, like they smelled something in terms of a human body, but no evidence was found in there afterward. But indications that it may have been her. It's all this stuff is still out there. And in fact, when I was reading the last bit of information on this, it seems like the police stated that, and this is a direct quote from last year, 2017. From the Boston Globe, it says it's still an open case. There's periods of activity and then it goes dormant, but there's no updates to share at any point. So, and this comes from people there in law enforcement and others who still consider it an open case to this day. But that's pretty much it with the disappearance of Maura Murray. She has a distinct, unfortunate notion of being, again, the first crime mystery of the social media age. Is she someone that disappeared voluntarily? Somebody that went missing on her own? That tried to get out of some kind of bad circumstances? Was she someone that was suicidal? Was she someone that was just, again, in the wrong place, wrong time, and abducted by someone that was very, very bad, and that's what's happened ever since? Is she somewhere in Quebec, somewhere there in Canada? Who knows? But if anybody has any more theories, anything else might have missed, please post those comments below. That'd be great to share, especially if anybody happens to have any updated info that may help with her disappearance. But to this day, her father especially has been the one that's still searching out there and is trying to find her and see, if at least, if not find her alive, at least try to find out what occurred to her after all these years. So, all right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.